Welcome back for your second module of our online grant writing training. In this module, we're talking about creating grant application components. In the second module here, we'll be looking at organizational structure and history. How is it that we focus on our organization's layout, our leadership, our staff capacity and competencies as we try to present to our grant makers a strong organization that will make a great funding partner? So as we begin, it should be with the organizational chart. Grant-seeking organizations of all shapes and sizes have them. Some are very flat, others are taller and have more of a hierarchy to them. Whether flat or deep, the grant maker isn't concerned about the specifics of how you choose to operate and organize your organization. You're the experts at that. Rather, what they're looking for is what is the support and the capacity that is provided to those who are doing the work? How is it that you're structured so that the administrative and leadership support is provided to programmatic staff? And so what you're trying to show through the provision of an organizational chart is both the structure and the capacity of the organization. Do you have the right type of people in order to achieve the project or program that you're proposing? Therefore, what's really important when a grant maker is looking at your organizational chart is not so much how and where the lines connect, but rather that they can see the job titles of those who are filling the roles, and that the titles that are in your organizational chart align to the resumes that you're providing as attachments, that they align to the titles that are in your budget and your budget justification. So those you're asking for funding support for aligns with that org chart. They're looking for the titles in the org chart to align to your logic model, to your work plan, to your program design elements, saying, here's the type of work we do, here are our key activities, here are our objectives, here's who does that work. Now, when the grant maker looks at the organizational chart, they can see consistency in the titles that are being used in all of the documents. Now, whose job is it to keep this organizational chart current? Well, it's rarely that of the grant professional, although it is an important document that we utilize within our grant applications. Unless you happen to be a grant professional who is also wearing the hat of human resources, you'll be relying on a grant team member from the Human Resources Department to help you keep this very common grant attachment current. What we want to have is a current organizational chart that reflects our current structure in terms of our programs, our services, and as I mentioned just a moment ago, with the current titles. That way, as soon as an opportunity arises, we get a grant application that we've agreed we're going to focus on, we aren't as a team spending a lot of time with human resources updating this chart. Rather, we can ask for the most current organizational chart. Hopefully there's a date already reflected somewhere on that document that's easy for us and for grant makers to tell how current it is. And HR, as a member of the grant team, will be able to provide that to you. Now you can use that document and the titles that are there to ensure that everything else you create, again, from the logic model and the work plan to the budget justification, the resumes and job descriptions that you update, you'll be able to ensure that there is consistency of title across all of those elements. Now, a common question that comes up when we talk about organizational structure, the organizational chart, and all of the spots we look for consistency is what to do if we are implementing a new project or program, if we plan to hire for a position. What do we do then? We haven't hired them yet. It might be a theoretical addition if we get the grant money. And so do we need to update the organizational chart? The answer is yes. If we are going to supply the organizational chart to the grant maker as one of their required attachments, what we should do Or rather, what we should ask our grant team members in the HR department to do is to update the organizational chart to reflect a TBH, a to be hired position, so that it can be seen where would that person, where would those individuals, if it's multiple staff, where within the organizational structure, where would they fit? That way, that TBH, that to be hired position with the title associated with the role can now be found in the org chart, and the dots can be connected in the logic model, in the work plan. You get where I'm going with the budget justification, and all the other attachments related to the job descriptions. The organizational chart is just one way that we demonstrate to a grant maker that an organization has capacity, has the strength, the right individuals in place, the right structure in place in order to implement the proposed project or program. If we step back and look at maybe more of a 30,000 foot overview and try to say, well, what are all the different ways that we can demonstrate our organization's capacity to a grant maker? What we'll find is that there are 8 common elements that are focused on when looking at nonprofit capacity. So I'd like to walk through each of these with you. We'll look at leadership, mission and strategy, program delivery, fund development, financial management, communications, technology, and strategic relationships. Now, I'll give some examples of all 8 elements. Please do not feel that there is pressure that you have to cover all 8 capacity elements in the organizational capacity section of a grant application narrative. Not at all. That is an awful lot that you would have to include. Rather, when you're given the choice, when you're presented with the opportunity to describe your organization's capacity, you should pick maybe 2, 3 maximum of these capacity elements that you think are your absolute best for your organization. And those are what you should showcase within your response. Is it expected that all 8 of these are amazing strengths for your organization? No. Grant makers understand that organizations often identify areas for improvement. You might have some super strength, you might have some areas of, all right, we're doing a good job, and you might have a few areas that you're working on, where maybe based on staff transition or just organizational growth that you're focusing on. It's an opportunity for growth, an area for improvement. It doesn't mean that you're doing a bad job in those items, but they might not be the ones that you would choose to highlight in your organizational capacity narrative. So let's look at each of these 8 in a little more detail. The first is leadership. So what sort of things might we highlight in an organizational capacity narrative related to leadership? We might talk about the leadership, the partnerships, the experience, the connections of our board members. Or maybe it's about our staff, our executive leadership, or our founder. Perhaps it's about the way that actually, as we've grown as an organization, that we've been focusing on succession planning. Maybe we're thinking about our founder now moving into more of an advisory role, starting to transition to an executive director that was not part of the founding of the organization. Or perhaps as we grow, we're thinking about the talent development that's been happening as we have more individuals in the senior leadership team. And so talking about how it is that we're strengthening the organization and growing together both through board and staff development. That might be something we highlight. A second area that we might focus on for organizational capacity is mission and strategy. What might we focus on here? What might we highlight? Well, what is the process that your organization goes through for its strategic planning? Do you go through a planning process every 3 years? Do you update the plan that you have created through that process annually? Is it reported on to the board of directors? Is it transparent to your staff? What are the different ways that you plan and make those plans visible as a guiding document, as a guiding principle for your organization, for your staff, for all of those who support your work? Another thing that we might focus on in mission and strategy is actually looking back at the earlier part of this module. What are the processes and tools that we utilize for needs assessment? What are the ways that we engage those that we will serve in getting their input so that we can plan our programs based on the specific and direct input from our community, from our target audience or our stakeholders? That brings us to our third area of strength. If we're thinking about the programs, the projects, the services that we're going to offer to our target audience or to our community, some of the things we could highlight as strengths might relate to the successful pilot projects that we have created and launched. What is the impact we have created through those pilot programs? Those are items worth highlighting in your organizational capacity section. Perhaps it's not so much about creating and launching a new pilot, but rather about the long-term sustainability and fidelity of the programming which you deliver. And so using your evaluation data to show how consistent and amazing your results are and the impact is that you're creating, that might be what you choose to highlight if you're thinking of program delivery as one of your strengths. Let's talk about fund development for a moment as a strength. This is about more than grant seeking. This is more about your entire fundraising plan. How is it that your organization generates revenue? Diverse revenue, sustainable revenue. Do you have a fundraising or a development plan that you follow that drives all of your decisions related to special events, to appeal letters, even to your grant applications and your grant calendar that you pursue? Having a diverse set of revenue, different activities that help you generate revenue, having diversified and sustainable revenue is worth highlighting as a strength in your organizational capacity section. Well, if we're talking about fundraising, I guess it makes sense that financial management is the next strength that we would focus on. This is more than managing your finances in a specific accounting system. For some grant makers, this will be about the checks and balances that you have in place, especially as we start to look at government funding. What are the different grant management processes, the procedures, the policies that you have in place that would be compliant with the federal grant management standards? What do you have in place that is OMB, Office of Management and Budget, compliant? Are you familiar with, are you sure that everything you do is uniform guidance compliant? These are some big questions, which is why we're probably going to look to our grant team members from the finance department to help us understand if our financial management, our processes, our procedures, those checks and balances, are these areas of strength that we should highlight for this particular grant maker. We'll probably need some language and examples from those finance team members. Next up is a potential strength to highlight in our organizational capacity is about our communications as an organization. How is it that we engage with our community? How is it that we engage with our stakeholders, with our donors, with our potential clients, with elected officials? What is the way that we make sure that our mission and our vision are clearly communicated to others? Depending on the type of application you're going to put forward, maybe it's something about community awareness and outreach. Well, if you have a strong history and if you have strong current staff and board, maybe even a committee focused on communications, that would be something certainly worth highlighting in your organizational capacity section. Strength number 7 is about technology. This isn't necessarily saying that you have the newest, shiniest, best laptops or video cameras or microphones. No, rather what it means is that you are using technology to expand, to enhance the way that you deliver programs and services. You're potentially using technology to maybe bridge the divide if you've got a gap in service, or if you've got a barrier that you're not quite sure how else to deliver the service. Why might we highlight technology as a strength? Well, certainly if we're thinking about something in telehealth, teleservices, distance learning, remote work training. There are so many programs that now have some sort of distance, remote, tele element to them that technology is almost becoming an expectation from grant makers for what you might have as some alternatives for your programming. So if indeed you believe that it is one of the things that sets you apart from other organizations, you certainly want to highlight that you utilize technology in creative ways to achieve your mission and vision. That brings us to our 8th strength, strategic relationships. This probably looks different for every organization. Who are your natural partners that you work with in order to achieve your mission and vision faster, better, with more individuals? That might mean a combination of legal partnerships, maybe something through a memorandum of understanding. It might mean slightly less formal collaborative engagements. It might mean community support. There is a wide range for what that really will mean for strategic relationships in your organization. But those relationships can be what helps to set you apart from another organization. So if you have true strategic relationships in place, especially if they are on the more formal side, with some sort of memorandum of understanding in place, something very formal like that, by all means, you should be highlighting those partners as part of your strength. You are digging deep and saying, in addition to our capacity, wow, look at these organizations and these individuals we work with. They make us so much stronger when we work together. So as we look at those 8 different items for capacity, you are going to pick and choose from those in a way that best describes your organization. Again, you should not feel pressured to talk about all 8. In fact, you likely won't have that room. So pick the best 2, maybe 3 items out of those 8 organizational capacity sections and highlight those in your organizational capacity narrative. Now, if you have a question about this particular module, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach me at Diane at dhleonardconsulting.com. Look forward to seeing you in your next module.